The morning sky above Earth cracked like broken glass. Dr. Sarah Chen pressed her face against the observatory window, watching as massive ships tore through the atmosphere with the sound of thunder that never ended. Each vessel was the size of a city, their black metal surfaces covered in strange symbols that seemed to move when she looked at them directly. "How many?" asked Director Martinez, his voice barely a whisper. 17 confirmed, Sarah replied, her hands shaking as she adjusted the telescope. Maybe more behind the larger ones. The ships didn't land. They simply stopped, hanging in the sky above major cities like dark clouds that refused to move. Beijing, New York, London, Tokyo, Moscow, all had at least one of the massive vessels positioned directly overhead. The shadow they cast was cold and absolute. Within hours, every communication system on Earth received the same message. It came in perfect English, Mandarin, Spanish, Arabic, and dozens of other languages simultaneously. The voice was neither male nor female, but carried the weight of authority that made world leaders feel like children. "We are the Vorthak. We have traveled between stars for 10,000 of your years. We have conquered 143 worlds. We have never been defeated." The message paused, and in that silence, Sarah could hear her own heartbeat. "Your species shows promise. You have developed weapons, built cities, reached beyond your planet. This is why we offer you a choice that we have never offered before." Another pause. Traffic had stopped in the streets below the observatory. People stood on sidewalks and parks, on rooftops, all looking up at the ships that blocked out the sun. "Send us your greatest fighters, your strongest warriors, your most skilled soldiers. We will face them in combat, as is our way. If your champions defeat ours, we will leave your world in peace and speak of your strength to others among the stars." Sarah felt her stomach drop. She had studied enough history to know what came next. "If your champions fall, as they have on every world before yours, your planet will join our empire. You will serve us as others have served. You will build our ships and fight our wars. Your children will know no freedom except what we allow." The transmission continued, providing coordinates for the challenge, a barren island in the Pacific Ocean that no country claimed. The date was set for exactly 1 week from the moment of first contact. "Choose wisely. You have 7 of your days." Then silence returned to Earth. But it was different now. Heavier. Pregnant with the weight of a decision that would determine the fate of every human being alive. Within minutes, emergency sessions began in every capital. The United Nations called for an immediate assembly. Military leaders huddled in war rooms, while scientists like Sarah tried to understand what they were truly facing. The Vorthak ships didn't respond to any attempts at communication. They simply waited, their dark presence a constant reminder that humanity's time was running out. General Patricia Reynolds stood before a room full of the world's most powerful people, her uniform crisp despite having not slept in 18 hours. "We've analyzed the transmission and the ships themselves using every method available. The technology is beyond anything we've encountered. The ships show no heat signatures, no electromagnetic emissions we can understand. They're just there. What about our nuclear capabilities?" asked the Russian representative. Reynolds shook her head. "Even if we could penetrate whatever defenses they have, which is unlikely, we'd be attacking ships positioned directly over our own cities. The fallout alone would kill millions, so we have no choice but to play their game," said the Chinese delegate. "It appears that Wei." Dr. Chen had been invited to the emergency session as one of the world's leading experts in xenobiology, though until yesterday, her field had been purely theoretical. The message mentioned 143 conquered worlds. If we assume they're telling the truth, that suggests a pattern. They arrive, issue this challenge, defeat the local champions, and add another planet to their empire. "Why offer the challenge at all?" asked the Secretary General. "If they're as powerful as they claim, why not simply take what they want?" Sarah had been thinking about that question since the transmission ended. Maybe it's not about power. Maybe it's about something else. Honor, tradition, sport. She paused, a chill running down her spine. Or maybe they enjoy it. The debate continued for hours. Who should represent humanity? Navy SEALs? Olympic athletes? Mixed martial arts champions? Special forces from various nations? The greatest military minds disagreed on everything except one point. Whoever they chose would almost certainly die. Meanwhile, on the island designated for the challenge, something impossible was happening. The Vorthak had constructed an arena overnight. Satellite images showed a perfect circle carved into the rock, surrounded by stands that seemed to grow from the earth itself. The architecture was alien but functional, designed for combat and observation. As news of the challenge spread, humanity began to show its true nature. Some people panicked, fleeing to remote areas or underground bunkers. Others gathered in churches, mosques, temples, and synagogues, praying to every god humanity had ever imagined. But many simply went about their daily lives, defiant in the face of the impossible. Children still played in parks, though their games now involved pretending to fight aliens. Artists painted murals on walls depicting human warriors standing tall against impossible odds. Musicians wrote songs about heroes who had not yet stepped forward. In her small apartment above the observatory, Sarah Chen looked out at the Vortex ship hanging over her city. Its surface seemed to ripple in the evening light, and she could swear she saw eyes looking back at her. Ancient eyes, patient eyes, eyes that had watched the fall of 143 civilizations. But as she watched, Sarah realized something that hadn't occurred to her before. In all their threats and boasts, the Vortex had made one critical error. They had given humanity a week to prepare, 7 days to study their enemy, 7 days to plan and train and hope, 7 days to discover what made humanity different from all the other species that had fallen before them. The question wasn't whether humanity could win. The question was whether the Vortex truly understood what they had awakened by coming to Earth. The world transformed in 72 hours. Every major power had submitted their finest warriors. But the selection process revealed something unexpected about humanity. The candidates weren't just soldiers and athletes. They were teachers who had served in combat zones, doctors who had worked in war-torn countries, engineers who had survived disasters, and ordinary people who had done extraordinary things. Maria Santos was a firefighter from Mexico City who had pulled 37 people from a collapsed building during an earthquake. Her file showed no formal military training, but her psychological profile indicated an unbreakable will and an ability to think clearly under pressure that impressed even hardened generals. David Park was a former South Korean Special Forces operator who had later become a search and rescue coordinator. He spoke 6 languages and had a reputation for finding lost climbers in conditions that would kill most people. His recommendation came not from the military, but from the families he had saved. Elena Kozlov was a Russian mathematician who had also served as a sniper in the army. Her commanding officers noted that she never missed, but more importantly, she had never taken a shot she wasn't certain was necessary. Her current work involved calculating trajectories for space missions. The selection committee realized they weren't just choosing fighters. They were choosing representatives of what made humanity unique, not just strength or skill, but the combination of intellect, compassion, and stubborn refusal to surrender. That seemed to define their species. Dr. James Mitchell was an Australian trauma surgeon who had served in 3 war zones. His hands had saved more lives than most soldiers had taken. When asked why he volunteered, he simply said, "Someone has to stand up." Captain Amara Okafor from Nigeria was a pilot who had flown humanitarian missions into areas so dangerous that other pilots refused to go. She had been shot down twice and walked out of hostile territory both times, carrying wounded crew members. The final selection surprised everyone. Instead of choosing the obvious candidates, the biggest, strongest, most heavily armed warriors, the committee selected 12 individuals who represented humanity's diversity and resilience. They were male and female, young and old, from every continent and many cultures. What they shared wasn't size or strength, but something harder to define. Dr. Sarah Chen had been studying the Vortex ships continuously, using every sensor and scanning method available. What she discovered made her blood run cold. "They're not just waiting," she told the emergency committee. "They're studying us. Every electromagnetic emission, every radio wave, every satellite signal. They're recording everything." "What does that mean?" asked General Reynolds. "It means they've done this before and they're very good at it. They're learning our languages, our tactics, our capabilities. By the time the challenge begins, they'll know exactly what we're capable of. Then we need to show them something unexpected," said Dr. Mitchell, who had been listening to the briefing. The chosen 12 were brought to a secret facility in Switzerland, where the world's best trainers worked around the clock to prepare them. But something strange happened during the training. Instead of competing against each other, they began working together. They shared techniques, covered each other's weaknesses, and developed strategies that no military manual had ever considered. Captain Okafor taught the others how to read air currents and predict weather changes by watching the way dust moved. Elena showed them how to calculate angles and distances using shadows and the position of the sun. Maria demonstrated techniques for moving through collapsed buildings that could work in any unstable environment. The training wasn't just physical. Psychologists worked with the team to prepare them for things no human had ever faced. What would it be like to fight an alien species? How would their minds cope with technology and biology, completely unlike anything on Earth? Meanwhile, the Vorthak remained silent. Their ships hadn't moved, hadn't communicated, hadn't responded to any attempts at contact. But people reported strange dreams. Dreams of vast spaces between stars, of worlds that burned, of warriors who fought with weapons that bent light and shaped gravity. Children were especially affected. They drew pictures of the same scenes with startling consistency. Tall figures in armor that seemed to be made of darkness itself, weapons that looked more like art than tools of war, and always in the background, the silent ships watching and waiting. Religious leaders around the world struggled to understand what was happening. Was this a test from God? A punishment? A challenge that would unite humanity or destroy it? Prayer services were held in every language, but the answers didn't come from above. They came from within. The scientific community worked frantically to understand Vorthak technology. Attempts to scan their ships revealed materials that shouldn't exist and energy patterns that violated known physics. It was as if the ships existed in a slightly different reality, one where the rules were subtly but importantly different. Dr. Chen made another disturbing discovery on the fourth day. The ships aren't just observing us, they're affecting us. Subtle changes in gravity, electromagnetic fields, even the composition of the atmosphere around major cities, nothing dangerous but measurable. "What are they doing?" asked the Secretary General. "I think they're preparing the battlefield. Not just the physical arena on the island, but Earth itself. They're making subtle adjustments to ensure the challenge takes place under conditions they understand and control." The selected champions learned about this manipulation with typical human stubbornness. Instead of being discouraged, they began training under those exact conditions. If the Vorthak wanted to fight in adjusted gravity, the humans would adapt. If the atmosphere would be different, they would prepare their bodies to handle it. On the fifth day, something unprecedented happened. Every person on Earth, regardless of language or culture, had the same dream. They stood in a vast arena carved from black stone, watching figures in dark armor face off against 12 humans. The dream was so vivid that people woke up able to describe details they had never seen, in places they had never been. The dream wasn't just a vision. It was an invitation. The Vorthak were opening their minds to humanity, showing them what was to come. But they had made a crucial mistake. In trying to intimidate their enemies, they had given humans something more valuable than fear. They had given them hope. In the dream, the 12 champions didn't look like soldiers or warriors. They looked like teachers and doctors and engineers and firefighters. They looked like ordinary people who had chosen to do something extraordinary. And in that moment, every person on Earth understood that the champions weren't fighting for governments or nations or ideologies. They were fighting for the right of ordinary people to remain free. The selection process was complete, but the real preparation was just beginning. 12 humans against warriors who had conquered 143 worlds. It should have been hopeless. Instead, for the first time since the ships arrived, humanity began to believe they might actually win. The island had changed overnight. What was once barren rock now hosted an arena that seemed to have grown from the earth itself. The structure was beautiful and terrible, carved from stone that absorbed light and reflected it in patterns that hurt to look at directly. Seats rose in perfect circles around a central fighting ground that was exactly 1 kilometer in diameter. The 12 human champions stood at the edge of the arena, looking across at their opponents for the first time. The Vorthak warriors were everything the nightmares had promised and worse. They stood 3 meters tall, their bodies covered in armor that seemed to be made of living shadow. No faces were visible beneath their helmets, only a faint glow where eyes might be. Dr. Sarah Chen watched from the observation area, surrounded by the greatest military minds humanity had ever assembled. Satellite feeds carried the event to every screen on Earth, In homes and schools and bunkers and temples, 7 billion people held their breath. "The weapons," whispered General Reynolds. "Look at their weapons." The Vorthak carried implements that defied easy description. Some looked like swords made of crystallized starlight. Others resembled guns but with no visible ammunition or power source. One warrior held what appeared to be a staff that bent space around itself, making the air shimmer and dance. The leader of the Vorthak stepped forward. Even among giants, this one was massive, easily 4 meters tall. When it spoke, its voice reached every person watching without any visible technology. "I am Kethmore, First Blade of the Vorthak. I have personally conquered 17 worlds. I have faced the greatest warriors of 100 species. None have stood against me for more than moments." The human champions exchanged glances. They had trained together for 6 days, but nothing could have prepared them for this moment. The air itself felt heavy with alien presence, and the gravity was indeed different here, just as Dr. Chen had predicted. Captain Amara Okafor stepped forward as the appointed speaker for humanity. "I am Amara Okafor, representing Earth. We're ready." Kethmore's helmet tilted slightly, as if examining an interesting insect. "You are small, weak. Your technology is primitive. Your warriors look like children pretending to be soldiers. Why do you think you can succeed where so many others have failed?" "Because we're still here," Amara replied simply. The answer seemed to amuse the Vorthak leader. A sound that might have been laughter echoed from within his helmet. "We shall see." The rules were simple, as they had been on 143 other worlds. Individual combat 1 against 1 until one side was eliminated. The winners would claim victory for their species. The losers would serve the winners for all time. The first match began immediately. Maria Santos faced a Vorthak warrior who moved like liquid mercury despite its massive size. The alien's weapon was a blade that seemed to cut through the air itself, leaving trails of darkness that lingered for seconds after each swing. Maria had no armor like her opponent, only her firefighter's gear modified with the best protection humanity could provide. Her weapon was a reinforced steel axe that looked primitive compared to the alien blade, but she had trained with it until it felt like an extension of her own arm. The Vorthak warrior attacked with impossible speed, crossing half the arena in a single bound. Maria rolled aside, feeling the alien blade pass so close that it cut strands of her hair. She came up swinging, her axe aimed at the warrior's knee joint. The blade connected with a sound like breaking glass. The Vorthak armor cracked and dark fluid leaked out. The warrior staggered, clearly surprised. In 143 worlds, apparently, no one had managed to damage a Vorthak in the first exchange. But the alien recovered quickly. It spun with fluid grace, and its blade caught Maria across the chest. The impact sent her flying across the arena, her modified gear smoking from whatever energy the weapon carried. She hit the ground hard but rolled to her feet, ignoring the pain. The alien blade had cut through her armor like paper, but the wound wasn't deep. She was still in the fight. The battle continued for 20 minutes. Maria used every trick she had learned in burning buildings and disaster zones. She moved unpredictably, used the arena's architecture for cover, and struck from angles the warrior didn't expect. 3 more times she managed to damage the alien's armor, each hit producing that same sound of breaking glass. But the Vorthak warrior was too strong, too fast, too skilled. Eventually, a blow connected that Maria couldn't avoid or absorb. She fell and didn't get up. The arena fell silent. On Earth, 7 billion people watched their first champion fall. But something was different from what had happened on other worlds. The Vorthak warrior stood over Maria's body, looking down at its damaged armor. Dark fluid continued to leak from multiple wounds. Kethmore's voice carried a note that hadn't been there before. "Your warrior fought well. She damaged Vextar more than the last 3 champions we faced combined." Dr. Mitchell was the next to fight. His opponent carried one of the crystal weapons that appeared to fire concentrated light. The doctor had no chance to get close, but he made the alien work for its victory. He used the arena's features for cover, forced the warrior to expend energy on missed shots, and managed to survive for almost 30 minutes before a blast finally found its mark. Again, the Vorthak warrior was damaged. Not badly, but enough to notice. Elena Kozlov faced the third alien with her sniper's patience and mathematician's precision. She had studied the previous fights, calculated the exact timing of alien movements, and prepared accordingly. When her opponent rushed forward with its crystalline blade, she was ready. Her shot took the warrior in the exact center of its helmet. The alien stumbled, its weapon flying wide. Elena's second shot hit the damaged spot, and cracks spread across the helmet like a spider web. The warrior fell to one knee, shaking its head as if dazed. For a moment it looked almost vulnerable, then it rose with a roar that shook the arena and charged with renewed fury. Elena managed to land 2 more shots before the alien reached her, but her bullets couldn't penetrate the body armor. The warrior's blade ended the fight with a single strike. But the alien's helmet was completely shattered. For the first time, the humans could see what lay beneath. The face was surprisingly human-like, though scaled and scarred, but it was the eyes that shocked everyone watching. They were old, ancient, and for just a moment, they showed something that looked almost like respect. The fourth fight began immediately. David Park faced an opponent with one of the space-bending staffs. The weapon created distortions in the air that made it impossible to judge distance or direction accurately. David should have been helpless against such technology. Instead, he closed his eyes and relied on his other senses. He had spent years finding lost people in conditions where sight was useless. He could hear the weapon's strange humming, feel the way it displaced air, even smell the ozone it produced. When he moved perfectly. His blade found gaps in the alien's defense that shouldn't have existed. The warrior tried to use its weapon's disorienting effects, but David fought as if he could see the future. The battle lasted 45 minutes. David took wounds that would have killed most people, but he kept fighting with the stubborn persistence that had made him legendary among rescue workers. When he finally fell, his opponent was bleeding from a dozen cuts and moving with obvious difficulty. The score was 4-0 in favor of the Vorthak, but something had changed in the arena. The aliens were no longer untouchable. They were hurt, tired, and for the first time in their long conquest, they were being forced to work for their victories. Kethmore looked across the arena at the remaining 8 human champions. When he spoke, his voice carried a new tone. Not respect exactly, but something that hadn't been there at the beginning. Your species is unexpected. Continue. The 5th fight changed everything, Dr. James. Mitchell stepped into the arena to face a Vorthak warrior, whose weapon defied physics. A whip made of what appeared to be liquid fire that could extend to impossible lengths and cut through solid stone. James carried only a surgeon's tools, modified and reinforced, but still recognizably medical instruments. The watching aliens seemed almost insulted by this choice of weapons. How could healing tools stand against weapons of war? They found out quickly. James moved like he was performing surgery, every motion precise and deliberate. When the fire whip lashed toward him, he didn't try to block or avoid it entirely. Instead, he moved just enough to let it pass by, then stepped inside the weapon's arc where it couldn't reach him. His scalpel found the joint where the warrior's armor connected at the shoulder. The cut was surgical in its precision, severing exactly the right connections to make the alien's arm go numb. The fire whip flickered and died as the warrior lost control. The Vorthak tried to switch the weapon to its other hand, but James was already moving. Another precise cut, this time behind the knee. The giant warrior stumbled, its balance compromised. A third cut, barely more than a scratch, found a nerve cluster that James had identified by studying the anatomy of the previous fallen aliens. The warrior collapsed, paralyzed, but alive. James stood over his fallen opponent, holding his bloodied scalpel, and said quietly, "Sometimes the smallest cuts are the most effective." The arena erupted in chaos. On Earth, 7 billion people screamed with joy and disbelief. In the alien section of the stands, the Vorthak were on their feet, their weapons humming with energy. This wasn't supposed to happen. This had never happened before. Kethmore's voice boomed across the arena. Impossible. Vothkan is our finest warrior after myself. How did you— I'm a doctor, James replied simply. I know how bodies work. All bodies, apparently. The next fighter was Captain Sarah Williams, a former Navy SEAL who had become a teacher after leaving the military. She faced an opponent carrying dual weapons that looked like controlled lightning. The alien moved with electrical speed, literally crackling with energy as it attacked. Sarah had watched every previous fight with a teacher's eye for patterns and learning. She had seen how each human champion had discovered something new about their opponents. Maria had learned they could be hurt. Elena had learned they could be confused. David had learned they could be outmaneuvered. James had learned they could be defeated. Now Sarah intended to learn something else. She didn't try to match the alien's speed or power. Instead, she fought like she was teaching a lesson. Every move was deliberate, designed to show her opponent something new. She demonstrated human adaptability, showing the alien one fighting style, then switching to another when it adapted. The Vorthak warrior grew increasingly frustrated as its electrical attacks failed to connect with their intended target. Sarah moved like water, flowing around the lightning, never quite where the alien expected her to be. Then she did something no warrior on any of the previous worlds had ever done. She started talking to her opponent. "You're faster than me," she said, dodging another lightning strike. "Stronger too. Better weapons, better armor, more experience." Another dodge, this one so close that her hair stood on end from the electrical charge. "But you know what you don't have?" The alien paused, apparently confused by the conversation in the middle of combat. "You don't have imagination." Sarah's next move was completely unexpected. Instead of attacking with her weapon, she threw her helmet at the alien's feet. The warrior instinctively stepped back and Sarah was already moving. Not toward her opponent, but toward the fallen weapon of one of the previous Vorthak warriors. She grabbed the crystalline blade that had belonged to Maria's opponent and spun in a perfect arc. The alien weapon cut through her opponent's electrical conduits like they were made of paper. The warrior's lightning died, and Sarah pressed her advantage. The fight ended when Sarah managed to tangle the warrior in its own disabled electrical cables. The alien lay on the ground, thoroughly trapped and unable to move. "Lesson 1, Sarah said, breathing hard. "Always be willing to learn something new." The score was now 6-2, but the momentum had completely shifted. The remaining Vorthak warriors looked at each other with what could only be described as uncertainty. On Earth, the celebrations were getting louder. The seventh fight featured Marcus Thompson, a former Marine who had become a firefighter after his service. His opponent was the largest Vorthak warrior yet, carrying a massive hammer that seemed to be made of condensed gravity. Each blow cracked the arena's stone floor. Marcus had learned from watching the others. He didn't try to match the alien's strength or endure its attacks. Instead, he did something that had never occurred to the Vorthak in their 10,000 years of conquest. He used their own technology against them. During the fight, Marcus managed to grab one of the damaged alien weapons from a previous battle. He didn't know how to use it properly, but he didn't need to. He used it as a club, as a shield, as a distraction. The weapon's energy patterns interfered with his opponent's gravity hammer, causing it to malfunction at critical moments. When the alien warrior fell, it was because its own weapon had turned against it, manipulated by human ingenuity and desperation. The eighth fight was won by Lin Jiang, a search and rescue specialist who used the arena's architecture itself as a weapon. She managed to bring down part of the structure on her opponent, trapping the warrior under tons of alien stone. By the ninth fight, something unprecedented was happening. The Vorthak were losing and they knew it. Kethmore himself stepped into the arena, abandoning the previous pattern of individual combat. "This ends now," he declared. "I will face your remaining champions myself, all at once." The four remaining humans, Anna Rodriguez, Pavel Volkov, Kenji Nakamura, and Lisa Chen, looked at each other and nodded. They had trained together, fought together, and learned together. They wouldn't abandon that unity. Now, the final battle began with the greatest Vorthak warrior who had ever lived, facing four humans who refused to give up. Kethmore was everything the humans had feared and more. He moved with impossible speed, wielded weapons that bent reality itself, and fought with the skill of someone who had conquered entire worlds. His first attack should have ended all four humans instantly. Instead, they scattered in four directions, each using tactics learned from watching their fallen comrades. Anna used Maria's unpredictability, Pavel employed David's sensory awareness, Kenji copied Elena's mathematical precision, and Lisa implemented James's surgical strikes. But more than that, they worked together in ways the Vorthak had never encountered. They covered each other's weaknesses, shared information in the middle of combat, and adapted their strategies in real time based on what the others discovered. For the first time in his life, Kethmore found himself fighting not just individual warriors but humanity itself. Every time he defeated one of their tactics, they invented a new one. Every time he adapted to their strategy, they changed it completely. The battle raged for over an hour. When it ended, both sides were bloody and exhausted, but the humans were still standing. Kethmore knelt in the center of the arena, his weapons scattered around him, his armor cracked and leaking. He looked up at the 4 humans surrounding him and spoke in a voice filled with something that sounded almost like wonder. In 10,000 years, across 143 worlds, no species has ever... He paused as if struggling to find the words. What are you? Ana Rodriguez, blood running down her face but still standing, gave him the only answer that mattered. We're human. The arena fell silent except for the labored breathing of the combatants. Kethmore remained kneeling in the center of the fighting ground, his massive form somehow diminished by defeat. Around him, the 4 surviving human champions stood ready for whatever came next, though their bodies screamed with exhaustion and pain. On Earth, 7 billion people held their breath. The impossible had happened. Humanity had won. But what did victory mean when facing a species that had conquered 143 worlds? The other Vorthak warriors stood frozen in their viewing area, as if their minds couldn't process what they had witnessed. For 10,000 years, this moment had never occurred. Their greatest champion, their first blade, their undefeated leader, knelt before creatures they had dismissed as primitives. Dr. Sarah Chen watched from the observation deck, her instruments recording everything. The energy readings from the Vorthak ships had changed the moment Kethmore fell. Instead of the steady, controlled patterns they had maintained for a week, the signatures were fluctuating wildly. Whatever was happening up there, it wasn't planned. Kethmore slowly removed his helmet, revealing a face that was surprisingly similar to human features, though scaled and marked with scars that spoke of countless battles. His eyes, ancient and tired, fixed on the 4 humans surrounding him. According to our laws, you have won, he said, his voice carrying across the arena without technological amplification. Your species has earned its freedom. We will depart and trouble you no more. Just like that? Asked Ana Rodriguez, her weapon still ready despite her exhaustion. Just like that, Kethmore confirmed. But there was something in his tone that suggested the situation was far more complicated than his words implied. Pavel Volkov, whose enhanced hearing had saved him multiple times during the battle, caught something the others missed. The ships, he said quietly. Listen to the ships. High above, barely audible but growing stronger, came a sound like singing. Not human voices, but something alien and haunting that seemed to resonate with the very air around the arena. The massive Vorthak vessels were producing harmonics that made the atmosphere itself vibrate. Kenji Nakamura, whose mathematical mind had calculated impossible angles during the fight, was studying the patterns of light coming from the ships. Those aren't random fluctuations, he realized. It's a sequence, a mathematical progression. They're communicating? Lisa Chen, whose medical knowledge had helped her identify weak points in alien anatomy, was watching Kethmore's vital signs. His heart rate is increasing. Stress indicators are off the charts. He's afraid of something. The great warrior heard her observation and looked up with something that might have been respect. You see much for such young creatures. Yes, I am afraid. Not of you, though perhaps I should be. I am afraid of what comes next. What do you mean? Ana demanded. Kethmore rose to his feet with obvious effort, his movements no longer fluid and graceful. In 10,000 years of conquest, we have never faced defeat. Our society, our culture, our very identity is built upon the certainty of our superiority. We are the Vorthak. We are invincible. We are... He paused, looking at his broken weapons scattered across the arena floor. We were undefeated. The singing from the ships grew louder, and now even the humans could hear complex harmonies and counter-melodies woven throughout the sound. It was beautiful and terrible, like a funeral dirge for a civilization. My people are debating, Kethmore explained. Some believe you cheated somehow, that victory by inferior beings is impossible. Others think this is a test from our ancestors, that we have grown weak and must prove ourselves anew. Still others... He trailed off, looking up at the ships with an expression of profound sadness. Still others believe what? Pavel pressed. Still others believe that if we can be defeated, we were never as strong as we thought, that perhaps the 143 worlds we conquered deserved better than slavery, that perhaps we have been the villains in our own story all along. The humans exchanged glances. This wasn't the reaction they had expected from a defeated enemy. Where was the rage? The promises of revenge? The threats against Earth's future? Dr. Sarah Chen's voice crackled through the communication system from the observation deck. The energy patterns from the ships are becoming increasingly unstable. I'm reading massive power fluctuations, as if they're preparing for something big. Kethmore nodded slowly. The Great Convergence. It was always a possibility, though we hoped it would never be necessary. What's the Great Convergence? Lisa asked, though she suspected she didn't want to know the answer. A council of all Vorthak, across all ships to determine the future of our species. It has been called only twice in our recorded history. Both times it resulted in... He searched for words in human language. Fundamental change. The kind of change that transforms a species beyond recognition. The arena began to shake, not violently but with a deep rhythmic pulse that seemed to come from the Earth itself. The Vorthak technology was affecting the planet on a massive scale, drawing power from sources the humans couldn't identify or understand. High above, the 17 ships began to move for the first time since their arrival. They didn't leave orbit, but instead arranged themselves in a perfect geometric pattern that hurt to look at directly. The singing grew louder, more complex, until it seemed like the voice of an entire civilization crying out in harmony. "You should leave," Kethmore said suddenly, urgency entering his voice. "All of you, return to your ships and go as far from this place as possible." "Why?" Anna demanded, and we won. "According to your own laws, my laws no longer matter," Kethmore interrupted. "When the Great Convergence begins, the old laws end. Everything ends. We become something new, or we cease to exist entirely." The other Vorthak warriors in the arena were now singing as well, their voices joining the harmony from the ships. But as they sang, something impossible began to happen. Their forms started to flicker, becoming translucent as if they were fading from reality itself. Dr. Chen's voice came through the communicator, tinged with panic. "The ships are disappearing from our sensors. They're still visible, but our instruments can't detect them anymore. It's like they're phasing out of our reality." Kenji's mathematical mind raced to understand what he was seeing. They're not just singing. They're using harmonics to alter their molecular structure. The frequency patterns are shifting them into a different dimensional phase. "Is that possible?" Pavel asked. "For them, apparently," Lisa replied, watching as Kethmore's own form began to flicker between solid and translucent. The great warrior looked down at his hands as they became increasingly transparent. "We are becoming what we were always meant to be, what we forgot we were in our arrogance and conquest. We are returning to the songs of our ancestors, to the harmony that existed before we chose the path of war." "But what does that mean for Earth?" Anna pressed. "For humanity?" Kethmore's voice was growing distant, as if he was speaking from very far away. "It means you are free. More than free. You have reminded us of something we lost long ago. You have given us back our souls." The four humans found themselves alone in the arena as the last of the Vorthak warriors faded from view. The ships above were barely visible now, more like mirages than solid objects. The singing continued, but it was growing fainter, as if the voices were moving away at impossible speed. Dr. Chen's instruments went completely silent. On every screen, the readings showed empty space where 17 massive ships had been moments before. The humans had won their freedom, but they had also witnessed something that would haunt them for the rest of their lives. An entire species choosing transformation over conquest, harmony over war, becoming something beyond their understanding rather than face the reality of defeat. As they prepared to leave the arena, Ana Rodriguez looked back at the spot where Kethmore had knelt in defeat. In the alien stone, barely visible, were markings that hadn't been there before, symbols that seemed to shift and change when she looked at them directly. "What do you think it says?" she asked the others. Kenji studied the symbols with his mathematician's eye. I think it says thank you." The evacuation from the island took place in an atmosphere of surreal calm. Military helicopters and transport ships arrived to collect the human champions and observers, but they found something that defied explanation. The massive arena, carved from living rock and built with technology beyond human understanding, was dissolving, not crumbling or collapsing, but actually dissolving, as if it were made of salt in rain. The alien stone was becoming transparent, then translucent, then simply ceasing to exist. By the time the last helicopter lifted off, the island had returned to its original barren state, showing no sign that anything extraordinary had ever happened there. Dr. Sarah Chen stared at her instruments during the flight back, trying to make sense of readings that violated everything she thought she knew about physics. "The molecular bonds are just stopping," she reported to the emergency committee via satellite link. "The alien materials aren't being destroyed. They're reverting to their component elements, and then those elements are disappearing entirely. General Reynolds leaned forward in his command center. Disappearing how? Energy can't be created or destroyed. Matter can't just vanish. Tell that to the Vorthak, Sarah interrupted. Because their entire civilization just broke the laws of physics. Around the world, similar reports were coming in from every major city. The massive ships that had hung in the sky for a week were fading like mirages. But unlike mirages, they were taking pieces of reality with them. Atmospheric readings showed impossible gaps where the ships had been. Not just empty space, but actual nothingness that hurt to contemplate. The 4 surviving champions were rushed to medical facilities for evaluation. But their physical condition was the least of anyone's concerns. Their accounts of what had happened in the arena were consistent but impossible. An entire species had chosen to transform themselves rather than accept defeat, becoming something beyond human comprehension. Ana Rodriguez sat in a debriefing room, still wearing her torn and bloodied combat gear, trying to explain the inexplicable to a room full of scientists and military officials. Kethmore said they were returning to what they were meant to be. That conquest had made them forget their true nature. But what does that mean practically? Asked Dr. Elizabeth Harper, the xenobiologist who had been brought in to study alien remains. Where did they go? What did they become? I don't think they went anywhere, Pavel Volkov said quietly. I think they're still here, just not in a way we can perceive anymore. His enhanced hearing had been picking up sounds that others couldn't detect. Harmonics at frequencies that shouldn't exist. Melodies that seemed to come from the spaces between atoms. The Vorthak ships might be gone, but their music lingered in ways that made sensitive equipment malfunction and gave certain people strange dreams. Children around the world were reporting the same phenomenon. They could hear singing in the wind, see faces in clouds that looked almost human but not quite, feel presences in empty rooms that weren't threatening but weren't entirely gone either. Adults dismissed these reports as imagination, but child psychologists noted the remarkable consistency of the descriptions across different cultures and continents. Kenji Nakamura had filled 17 notebooks with mathematical calculations since returning from the island. I think I understand what happened, he announced during one of the debriefing sessions. The Vorthak weren't just using advanced technology. They were using mathematics that describes reality at a level we haven't discovered yet. Explain, demanded Dr. Chen. Think of it this way. We understand 3 dimensions of space and 1 of time. The Vorthak were operating in at least 7 dimensions, possibly more. When they underwent their great convergence, they didn't disappear from our reality. They expanded beyond it into what? Into the spaces between spaces. The dimensions we can't perceive. They're still here, but they exist in mathematical relationships that our instruments can't measure and our minds can't comprehend. Lisa Chen, whose medical expertise had proven crucial in the arena, was studying the physiological effects of exposure to Vorthak energy. The champions aren't entirely human anymore, she reported to a classified medical board. The cellular changes are subtle but measurable. Enhanced reaction times, improved pattern recognition, increased resistance to radiation and environmental toxins. Are they dangerous? On the contrary, they're evolving. The exposure to Vorthak technology and energy fields has triggered genetic changes that appear to be entirely beneficial. They're becoming something more than baseline human. The revelation sparked intense debate in scientific and philosophical circles. Had the Vorthak in their final moments given humanity a gift? Were the changes intentional or a side effect of their transformation? And most importantly, what did it mean for the future of the human species? Meanwhile, across the galaxy, other changes were occurring that Earth couldn't yet detect. On the 143 conquered worlds, Vorthak overseers and administrators were simply vanishing. Not dying, not fleeing, but fading away like morning mist. The enslaved populations found themselves suddenly free, their chains dissolved along with their captors. But freedom brought its own challenges. Many of these species had been enslaved for so long that they had forgotten how to govern themselves. Some worlds descended into chaos, others began the slow process of rebuilding their civilizations. A few, however, began to hear the same harmonics that sensitive humans were detecting on Earth. The Vorthak hadn't just transformed themselves. Their change had created ripples throughout reality itself, affecting every species they had touched, every world they had conquered, every civilization they had encountered. The universe was becoming something different, something more complex and harmonious than it had been before. Dr. Sarah Chen made the most disturbing discovery 3 weeks after the arena incident. While analyzing atmospheric data from around the world, she found patterns that shouldn't exist. The air itself is singing, she reported in a paper that would revolutionize physics. At the quantum level, the molecular interactions are creating harmonic frequencies that spell out mathematical relationships we're only beginning to understand. What do the equations describe? Asked her research partner. Evolution, not biological evolution, but the evolution of reality itself. The universe is becoming more complex, developing new properties and capabilities, and Earth appears to be at the center of the transformation. The realization hit the scientific community like a thunderbolt. Humanity hadn't just defeated the Vorthak. They had somehow catalyzed a fundamental change in the nature of existence itself. The victory in the arena had been more than a battle between species. It had been the moment when the universe chose a new path forward. Religious leaders struggled to understand the theological implications. Had humanity been chosen for some cosmic purpose? Were they witnessing the birth of a new phase of creation? The questions had no easy answers, but the harmonics in the air seemed to suggest that something vast and benevolent was watching over Earth. The 4 champions found themselves changed in ways that went beyond the physical. They could sense things that others couldn't, understand patterns that had previously been invisible, and occasionally, in moments of deep meditation or extreme stress, they could almost hear the Vorthak singing in dimensions beyond normal perception. "They're not gone," Ana Rodriguez said during one of her psychological evaluations. "They're just bigger now. They exist at a level we can barely imagine, but they're still there, and I think they're proud of us." The psychiatrist made careful notes. Proud of what? For showing them who they really were, for forcing them to choose between conquest and transformation, for proving that sometimes the smallest actions can have the biggest consequences. As weeks turned to months, the full scope of the change became clear. The Vorthak had indeed vanished from normal space-time, but their influence remained. Technologies began appearing in human dreams, blueprints for devices that could manipulate gravity, bend light, even peer into other dimensions. Scientists who had studied the alien materials found themselves capable of insights that revolutionized their fields overnight. Humanity was being prepared for something. Uplifted, evolved, made ready for a future that would require capabilities they didn't yet possess. The Vorthak's final gift wasn't just freedom, it was potential. But potential for what? And what would happen when humanity was ready to step into the spaces between spaces, to join the Vorthak in dimensions beyond normal perception? The answers lay in the harmonics that still echoed through Earth's atmosphere, in the dreams of children who could see faces in clouds, and in the strange new abilities manifesting in people around the world. The Vorthak had kept their promise. They had departed and would trouble humanity no more. But they had also done something that no one had expected. They had made humanity ready to follow them. 5 years after the arena, Dr. Sarah Chen stood in the observatory that had become her second home, watching something that still amazed her daily. Where once there had been empty space between Earth and its moon, now there were structures that defied easy description. They weren't built by human hands, yet they were undeniably human in origin. The crystalline formations had begun appearing 6 months after the Vorthak disappeared. At first they were microscopic, barely detectable even with the most sensitive instruments. But they grew, following mathematical patterns that Kenji Nakamura had dreamed about, and equations that appeared in children's drawings around the world. The latest report from Mars Colony Alpha, her assistant announced, handing her a data pad. They're reporting the same phenomenon. The structures are appearing throughout the solar system, always in locations that optimize some kind of energy flow we don't fully understand yet. Sarah nodded, unsurprised. Humanity had been expanding into space at an unprecedented rate since the arena incident. Technologies that should have taken centuries to develop were being discovered in dreams, solved in moments of inspiration that felt more like remembering than inventing. The 4 champions had been the first to experience these flashes of insight, but the phenomenon had gradually spread to others. Ana Rodriguez was now Director of Interstellar Relations, a position that hadn't existed before the Vorthak arrival, but had become essential as humanity made contact with the freed worlds of the former Vorthak Empire. Each species they encountered told a similar story: the sudden disappearance of their oppressors, followed by strange dreams and rapid technological advancement. "They're all evolving," Anna reported during the weekly council meeting. "Every species the Vorthak conquered is developing new capabilities, new understandings. It's as if their transformation created a wave of advancement that's spreading across the galaxy." Pavel Volkov, whose enhanced hearing had led to breakthroughs in quantum communication, was monitoring signals from across known space. "The harmonics are getting stronger," he reported. "More complex. I think the Vorthak are still growing, becoming something even larger than what they were when they left our reality." The transformation wasn't limited to technology and expansion. Humanity itself was changing in ways both subtle and profound. Children born after the arena incident showed capabilities that previous generations had never possessed. They could sense electromagnetic fields, process mathematical relationships intuitively, and communicate with technologies in ways that seemed almost telepathic. Lisa Chen, now head of the Human Evolution Monitoring Project, documented these changes with scientific rigor tinged with wonder. "The genetic modifications appear to be permanent and hereditary," she reported. "Each generation shows enhanced capabilities compared to the last. We're not just Homo sapiens anymore. We're becoming something new." "Homo stellaris," suggested Kenji, who had been working on taxonomic classifications for the new human variants, star humans, adapted for life among the cosmos rather than just on a single world. The four champions had aged differently than normal humans, not slower exactly, but differently. They remained vital and sharp, while developing what could only be described as presence, an aura of authority and wisdom that made others naturally defer to their judgment. They had become something between human and whatever the Vorthak had transformed into. The mystery of the Vorthak's ultimate fate continued to intrigue researchers across multiple disciplines. Theoretical physicists proposed that they had evolved into pure energy, existing as living mathematics in dimensions beyond normal space-time. Philosophers suggested they had achieved a form of collective consciousness that transcended individual existence. Religious scholars debated whether they had become gods or angels or something entirely outside traditional theological frameworks. Dr. Elizabeth Harper, the xenobiologist who had spent years studying Vorthak remains, made a breakthrough discovery that changed everything. "They're not gone," she announced during a global scientific conference. "They're everywhere." She displayed readings that showed quantum signatures consistent with Vorthak energy patterns in everything from stellar formation to planetary atmospheres, to the background radiation of space itself. They've become part of the fundamental structure of reality. They're in the forces that hold atoms together, the patterns that guide galaxy formation, the equations that describe how consciousness emerges from complexity. "Are you saying they've become the universe?" asked a colleague. "I'm saying they've become what they were always meant to be. What they told us during the Great Convergence. They returned to the songs of their ancestors. I think their ancestors were the universe itself." The revelation recontextualized everything humanity thought they knew about the arena incident. They hadn't defeated conquerors. They had helped prisoners remember their true nature. The Vorthak hadn't been evil, just lost, wandering the galaxy trying to fill a void they couldn't name by conquering world after world. Humanity's victory had reminded them of their cosmic heritage and allowed them to return home. But the story didn't end with the Vorthak's transformation. Their departure had created an opportunity and a responsibility for humanity to step into their role as shepherds of developing civilizations. Not as conquerors, but as guides, helping younger species avoid the mistakes that had trapped the Vorthak in cycles of endless warfare. The crystalline structures that now filled human space served as beacons, transmitting the mathematical patterns that enabled faster-than-light travel, dimensional manipulation, and consciousness expansion. Humanity was building a network that connected not just solar systems, but levels of reality that had previously been inaccessible. Other species were joining the network as they developed the necessary capabilities. The former Vorthak Empire was being reborn as a confederation of free worlds, united not by conquest but by shared exploration of the mysteries that lay beyond normal perception. Ana Rodriguez stood in the command center of the first truly interstellar human vessel, watching representatives from 17 different species work together to solve problems that would have been impossible for any one civilization to tackle alone. The Vorthak were right about one thing, she mused to her crew. Unity does create strength. They just had the wrong idea about how to achieve it. On Earth, the four champions continued to serve as bridges between humanity's past and its transcendent future. They could still hear the Vorthak singing in dimensions beyond normal perception, and sometimes, in moments of deep meditation, they could almost understand the words. The song spoke of cycles within cycles, of species that rose and fell and rose again, of consciousness expanding to fill new spaces as the universe grew more complex. They spoke of hope and potential, and the infinite possibility that existed when beings chose cooperation over conquest. Pavel's enhanced hearing picked up something new in the cosmic harmonics and voices that weren't Vorthak. Humanity's own songs were beginning to join the galactic chorus, adding melodies of creativity and compassion and stubborn determination to overcome any obstacle. We're becoming like them, he reported to the others, not the conquerors they became, but what they were originally. We're learning to sing the songs of creation. Kenji's mathematical models predicted that within a few generations, humanity would be ready for the next phase of evolution, transcendence beyond physical form while maintaining individual consciousness. They would join the Vorthak in the spaces between spaces, but as partners rather than subjects. Lisa's medical studies showed that the changes in human genetics were accelerating with each generation. Our children's children might be the first truly cosmic humans, she announced, capable of existing simultaneously in multiple dimensions, of thinking thoughts that span galaxies, of creating realities through pure intention. The mighty fighters who had confronted humanity and disappeared had left behind the greatest gift imaginable, not just freedom, but the knowledge and capability to transcend the limitations that had bound humanity to a single world and a single reality. Dr. Sarah Chen continued her observations, tracking the expansion of human consciousness across the galaxy. The crystalline structures had begun communicating with each other, creating a network of intelligence that spanned hundreds of star systems. Through this network, humanity was learning lessons that the Vorthak had taken millennia to discover. The arena where it all began was now a pilgrimage site, though the island remained exactly as it had been before the alien intervention. Visitors came not to see monuments or artifacts, but to experience the strange peace that lingered in the air, where two species had met and changed each other forever. Sometimes, on very clear nights when the solar wind carried harmonics from the outer system, sensitive individuals could still hear the Vorthak singing. Their songs told stories of gratitude and pride, of a species that had found its way home because 12 humans had refused to surrender. The mighty fighters had indeed confronted humanity and were never seen again. But they hadn't vanished. They had become something greater, and in doing so, they had shown humanity the path to its own transformation. In the end, the greatest victory wasn't humanity's triumph in combat. It was the moment when two species chose to evolve to